Bill Barr facing the Senate today. This was the first time he's done that since Bob Mueller finished his probe. Barr was on defense and under fire, while the top Democrat who runs the party's subpoena power takes a new shot here. Speaker Pelosi making it plain tonight she doesn't trust Barr, saying he's not the Attorney General of Trump. He's the Attorney General of the United States. I don't trust Barr. I trust Mueller, and basically comparing his work to a train wreck.
How very, very dismaying and disappointing that the chief law enforcement officer of our country is going off the rails yesterday and today.
Barr trying to turn attention to his comments on the lawful surveillance of some Trump-linked aides today during that hearing. That was apparently his rhetorical or strategic priority, and it's gotten some attention. But I would draw your attention here at the top of our broadcast to one of the more important substantive revelations in this hearing. It came under cross-examination by Senator Van Hollen, pressing Barr on his own choice to release his own view of his findings on obstruction of justice when Mueller pointedly had not exonerated Trump.
I am going to explain my decision. And to the extent that requires any assessment of the Mueller report, I'm going to do that when the Mueller report is out.
Did your decision require you to look into the intent of the President of the United States with respect to obstruction of justice?
I'm not going to discuss my decision. I will lay it out after the report is out.
Mr. Attorney General, the thing is, you put this out there. I mean, the president went out and tweeted the next day that he was exonerated. That wasn't based on anything in the Mueller report with respect to obstruction of justice. That was based on your assessment. That was on March 24th. And now you won't elaborate at all as to how you reached that conclusion.
I will discuss that decision after the report is out.
Did Bob Mueller support your conclusion?
I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion.
I don't know whether Bob Mueller supported my conclusion is another way of saying he didn't support my conclusion to my knowledge. Obviously, if he did, that's the kind of thing Barr would want to put out there. You saw that exchange there. It was Senator Van Hollen putting the pressure on Barr. He joins me later in the show. But I begin right now with our panel. Mara Gay, editorial board member from the New York Times, and Jed Sugarman, a law professor at Fordham, co-author on the amicus brief in Crew versus Trump. Good evening to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
What did we learn from Bill Barr's testimony?
Well, we didn't learn a ton. I mean, he's evasive. So I would say what we're learning is that he doesn't exactly want to share anything until the report's out, which is a very different strategy when he wrote a letter on Sunday where he was very eager to share his version. So I think what we have to look back at is whether Barr has learned something already, right? Whether he rushed to get a letter out on the Sunday after the report was dropped. He rushed to get a letter out with his spin on it. Didn't share the executive summaries. Since then, Mueller's team has fired a shot across the bow. They've come out to the Washington Post and the New York Times and said they wrote executive summaries and summaries of various sections, and they were calling out Barr. We will now see. And then Barr wrote a second letter on the Friday after, which showed that he was walking things back. We will learn when the report is issued in a week whether he has learned from this shot across the bow that he has to worry about Mueller calling him out again.
Right. Learning implying that he might have some process whereby he wants to change the outcome. The other possibility is that he's very stuck on his goal, which is creating the appearance of the exoneration, and that he's sort of doing a classic Aaliyah. If at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. Try again.
That's right. My concern here is that you look at Barr's testimony and you continually think to yourself, how is this the person who decides what the American public sees and whether the president gets to tweet that he's been exonerated? And, the fact that this decision was ultimately punted for whatever reason by Mueller and then left to this political appointee really gives Americans little faith that the process is unfolding as we had hoped it would, and as I think, frankly, the country really needs it to unfold in order to really address whatever needs to be addressed and move on as one country. I think.
Well, and isn't it Barr's narrative to claim that somehow this was left up to him? I mean, Jed, as you know, the rules, which our viewers have heard the author of those rules, Neil Kochel, discuss, don't at all require a multi-hundred-page report. It seems to me that in the short run, Barr is doing PR, but in the long run, Mueller, by writing such a lengthy, exhaustive report, has put a tremendous amount of pressure within the rules, not outside of them, but within the rules, for something sooner or later to come out.
That's right. And the other way that things come out is by subpoena and by litigation. I think this is where we're heading. I mean, Barr has sent signals that he's going to redact a significant amount. This whole color coding thing that sounded very odd, right? That he has these different regions that he hasn't. Keep in mind, he could go to a grand jury and request to release it. And
have you ever seen a multicolored legal document redaction?
No, I have not.
So, you know, the thing about the beat, as I think Mara knows, is sometimes when we're trying to be funny, we're not, and that's on me. But other times when we're trying to just deal with the serious news, it gets a little funny. I mean, that's not a joke. Yeah. This is Attorney General of the United States who sort of just comes out and says, by the way, we're just going to have different colors for different types of redactions, which has never been done before, and lawyers are usually more interested in precedent.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, as a journalist, you know, part of our job is to get public information to the public, and so that requires a lot of freedom of information requests. You're constantly trying to get information out of government that you believe that the public has a right to see and to know. And you know, Barr is acting as though this is normal, as though this is kind of the ordinary course of events. And it's not. And I just hope that the American people really understand that this is not business as usual. He seems to be kind of making the rules up as he goes along.
Well, and the strategic reason for him to use the colors, Jed, would be that not all redactions are created equal. If he can prove that, say, the bulk or majority of his redactions, according to the Justice Department, are grand jury, that allows him to argue, even if it's over-inclusive and overdone, allows him to argue, well, look, these are really serious ones. Whereas I can't imagine that you would come up with this system and then do, I don't know, lime green for peripheral reputation interests, and then have it be just a big green folder, because that would make him look worse.
Yes, but he also has to anticipate that this is going, regardless of what color he chooses, judges will get a chance to look at this, or there'll be litigation to look at how valid these redactions are. A similar process happened with Nixon versus the United States over the Oval Office recordings. There was a process to check whether there was executive privilege or these other rationales were valid, and ultimately that took 5 months. But Barr has to realize that there are several ways his redaction is not the last word. Right. Litigation, and Mueller being called to testify himself, and other witnesses, they will be in front of Congress to be unredacted and give their version of these events.
And this brings us to where I want to bring in former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirchner. Glenn, take a listen to the exchange today where we again saw Barr trying to invoke or hug Mueller's credibility without committing to follow what Mueller's team decides. Take a look on redactions.
And you're not going to overrule this special counsel's judgment with respect to any of those categories, right?
I haven't.
And can you tell us you will not?
Well, if an issue comes up, you know, I don't want to prejudge it, but it's not my intention. My intention is to allow the team to make the redactions.
Glenn.
Yeah, Ari, it really seems like what Barr is trying to do by selectively answering questions, he's creating this fog of exoneration where he's answering questions that seem to potentially be helpful to the president, declining to answer questions that may hurt the president, like, well, has anybody in the White House reviewed this report? And I tell you, I found really problematic that one clip that you played earlier where they're asking Barr, well, does Bob Mueller agree with you exonerating the president on obstruction of justice? And Barr says, I don't know. And then he follows up with, well, I didn't even bother to ask him. You know, Ari, Bob Mueller was not only the director of the FBI, he was the acting U.S. attorney in Massachusetts and the U.S. attorney in San Francisco. He was the chief of the entire homicide practice at the D.C. U.S. attorney's office. The man knows how to make a prosecutorial decision, and left to his own devices, he always will. You know, you have to wonder what kind of a shell game Barr is playing. And now we're going to get the color redactions, as you all were just referencing, and it's going to go from a fog of exoneration to what? A rainbow of obfuscation? The whole thing. And I think Jed put his finger.
What you're gesturing towards is the type of colored smoke you see at some rock shows, sometimes punk shows. They have colored smoke machines. That seems to be where you're going if it's a fog of rainbow redactions.
Yes, and designed to not have you pay attention to the fact that the Rock Act is really over the hill and not all that entertaining anymore. I think that Jed put his finger on it, though.
Although don't be ageist. Some of my favorite acts I've been touring for a long time, but I take your point. Final thought, Glenn.
So final thought, I think Jed is right. Is this a game of delay where Barr is going to force this into the courts, fight tooth and nail over every redaction, and maybe push this closer and closer to 2020?
I think that's the question that's hanging over all of this. And anyone who was giving Barr more of the benefit of the doubt early on, or saying, wow, this was complicated with the letters, is now seeing with the way he testified today, he basically wanted people to believe, and I don't think you need to be a congressional expert or a legal expert to see the fallacy. He wanted people to believe that the only thing he could really say was the really good news that he cherry-picked for his boss, the president, and nothing else could possibly be said in a lawful oversight hearing with the Congress. How long that's going to last is going to be into the interbranch fight, and as you three have all said, it's going to depend potentially on whether this goes to court. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.